Cool. Testing mic seems to be okay. So
Hey, I'm gonna suggest something really quick before we start.
what's up?
Can you share your screen at 1080 30 FPS instead of 1440 30 FPS?
Yes, let me do that. Let's see.
I also did things get moved up or did I get the time wrong?
So they said between starting any time between 10 and 11 p.m., but they didn't give us like a actual um like solid time. And then Franz just mentioned they were ready like a few,
No, great.
yeah, a few minutes ago, so that's why I'm trying to figure out how to do this.
Okay.
Stop streaming and then share
I'm
the
trying to make
screen.
sure that I have all of the cards in OBS, which I don't.
Okay. 1080, right?
Possible? Yes, 1080.
Okay. Cool.
If possible, it may be helpful if we can ask them to wait like 10 minutes before they start.
Sounds good.
Uh, see.
Cool. Sounds like they are good with it. So I think we have 10 minutes. So no rush there.
Okay, I'm gonna try to get all these. I should have most of the cards already. There's a couple that I'm missing, and then I will start the live stream, and then I'll send out a tweet telling everyone that we're going live, and then we can start shortly after that.
Cool. I need to set up the camera angles, so it's good. So camera one.
Let's see. What else do I need? I think I have all that. Is
Save camera four. Zoom in. Three. And then zoom in. Camera two. Okay. Perfect. Got the camera angle set up. I do you need some help with double checking the cards or the needed cards or anything?
no, I have them pulled up now. I'm just making sure that I have
Mm,
the images for all the cards in OBS so that I can pull them up when we're talking about them.
cool. Yep. So it looks like uh, Steadfast is definitely running a similar amber or sorry amethyst ruby amethyst control setup, and then Franz is running the amber emerald, or no, amethyst emerald setup there. So
Yeah.
cool.
Luckily, I took a look at the lists earlier today, so I'm not panicking on that front. What did I just do?
If you need me to name off some names of the cards in your list, I can also do that. But yep, you got it. All good.
Let's see, image. Where is this card? Oh, there it is. Jafar, I should have Befuddle, and I should have Elsa. Yep, okay, so that looks good. Let's get these in here. Okay, turn that off, turn that off. And then now I go to Franz's list. Let's see, do I have Yzma? I don't. Okay, we do that. I don't have the other Elsa. And I don't have Zeus. Jay, I think I saw that list today that you mentioned last night on stream, the Sapphire Amber one
Hmm.
that punished Rafiki so bad. It looked interesting.
Yeah. Feel like so I ran it a little bit more today. It does pretty good against control. Does not do so good against a whole new world steel shenanigans, but it's definitely interesting.
Okay, I just gotta get in John Silver and then Mother Gothel, and I'll have all the cards and I'll go get the stream started.
Sounds great.
All right. Turn this off. Turn this off. Have all these open. Okay. Yes, this will be streamed on Lorcana Twitch, by the way. soon. I'm not going to be able to see anything coming from the chat in Discord. So if you need to talk to me specifically, it would be good to do that in the chat on the Twitch channel once I log in. I have to find the password every time.
And just taking a quick glance at chat, low, it might be. Oh, I guess he can't hear me. That's that won't help. Yeah. Thank you, Tron Dragon, for pointing out it might be his settings on Discord.
Okay. Jay, did you do anything to your microphone? You sound kind of loud for me, but does he sound loud for anybody else listening in
I
chat?
I
Because
can
if not, I
adjust
can
my
fix it on my
microphone.
end.
Let me just take a look at my devices. Okay. Microphone should be there, and then here. How does this sound?
I'm sorry,
Right now?
say something again, Jay.
Yep. How does this sound for
That sounds good.
the mic? Okay. Cool.
Sounds great.
Just adjusted it just down a tiny bit, so that should be good.
Checking
Uh,
a couple things really quick before we get started. There's that. Can you move the camera north just a tad bit?
like that.
Yeah, perfect.
Cool.
Okay, let's
Actually,
see.
hold on. Can you let me know if this works? Sorry, I was a little bit adjusted. I can move it north a little bit. Uh, how's that?
That looks good.
Okay, sounds good. I will resave this as camera one.
Let
Cool, cool, cool.
me make sure the stream information looks good. Oh god, I'm hearing myself.
uh,
Okay, that's better.
okay. Are we are good to go live. Just give me just let me know, Brandon, once you start the stream. So
Okay. All I have to do is send out a tweet from the Lorcana HQ account, and then we should be good to go. I'll count you down, and then I will open us up. What do we want to tell the uh, Franz and them while we open up?
so I just let them know we'll need like a couple more minutes. And so I think we could probably just do a really quick introduction, like join us for the semifinals of the Lorcana HQ Constructed, a game against Franz and Ssteadfast, and just let them start. Would that work?
Yes.
Okay. And I feel like we could probably fill in some of the deck information as they kind of get started with the mulligans and stuff. So
Yeah. Okay, tweet just went out. Let me close a bunch of stuff that I don't need. I need that. The stream is open. Looks like everything's good on that end. Close all of this. Okay. Music's going on in the background. Jay, I am ready whenever you are, buddy.
Sounds good. Let's kick it off. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to fade out the music, which I'm doing right now. I'm going to switch in 3, 2, 1. Welcome everyone to the Lorcana HQ semifinal constructed tournament. We have a super exciting evening tonight. We have Ssteadfast versus Franz from Traverse Tavern. I am B Squared 24, also known as Brandon, and with me is my amazing co-host Jalen. Jalen, say hi.
Hey everyone.
How excited are you for the semifinals? It feels like we have been covering these rounds for what feels like ages now, having the 48-hour windows in between rounds. We're finally getting to the end of it. I'm very excited to see this. The winner of this goes on to the finals. Now, for those that you know, Walter Jensid, he made it into the finals. We saw him, I think it was maybe not the last time we streamed, but the time before that. He's made it all the way to the semifinals, so the winner of this makes it straight into the finals.
Yeah, definitely. It's going to be a matchup that's going to be super exciting to see either of these players. And so Walter is just essentially waiting in the lines for the final match. And I think with that, the players are about ready to start. And so I just quickly sent them a message saying they can feel free to start whenever. But just a little bit of background. We know Franz is kind of playing his Amethyst Emerald aggro deck, whereas Ssteadfast is running a control deck that's Amethyst Ruby that I'm sure a lot of people have kind of gotten to know. And so it'll be definitely an interesting matchup to see if in this game Franz can kind of outpace and pressure the control player, or does Ssteadfast as a control player, is he able to stabilize the early game in order to get into his late game win conditions?
Yeah, while we wait on the mulligans, I didn't see who was supposed to go first. While we wait on the mulligans, I want to review some of the decks real quick. We've seen a lot of control in these games. We've seen a lot of Ruby, a lot of Amethyst, and a lot of Sapphire. And so I think it's really fun to see Franz running the Emerald Amethyst deck that basically just does what Emerald is good at disrupting the opponent, making it really difficult for them to make decisions. But we're not going to go too deep. We see the game is starting. It looks like Ssteadfast inks Aladdin Heroic Outlaw, and he is going to play out a Shield of Virtue. And for those of you that don't know, the Shield of Virtue lets you ready another character for 3 ink, and they can't quest for the rest of the turn, but that's a great card for Ssteadfast, especially with those Aladdin Heroic Outlaws, whom we can see when Aladdin Heroic Outlaw challenges. If he banishes something, the opponents lose 2 lore and he gains 2 lore. So we see that as an early play. Franz has a pretty aggressive deck with playing a couple 2-drops like Flynn Rider. And I only see Flynn Rider in his hand right now, but he runs a couple other 2-drops. So maybe we can see Franz get out pretty early.
Yeah, it is notable that Franz did not have a 1-drop in this game. I'll need to go check to see if he does run any 1-drops, but potentially not playing something on turn 1 may have slowed him down a little bit. It will be interesting to see from Ssteadfast's perspective how useful the shield of virtue is going to be. I see that he has 2 Mauis in hand, which essentially the shield might allow those Mauis to attack multiple times, which can make a huge difference. We just saw Ssteadfast play the Befuddled. It's a card that essentially lets you return any 2 cost or 1 cost card on either side of the field back into their owner's hand. And so we just saw him befuddle the Flynn Rider back into Franz's hand. Now it doesn't really kind of remove Flynn Rider. Franz can always play back the Flynn Rider, but the whole point of befuddled is to slow down your opponents. And so now we can see it's turn 4, Ssteadfast already has 4 ink, and Franz only has a Maleficent on board with zero lore currently, and he is finally on the board with 1 lore. So we definitely see that kind of going first for Ssteadfast, as well as playing just some befuddles has really kind of slowed down kind of the pace of an aggro deck. So we'll see how it continues to develop as now we see that Maui come down, and Maui is going to provide a lot of good kind of control to help stabilize the board. Maui itself can't quest. It has 0 lore to quest with. However, Maui does have rush, which means that the moment he comes down, he can attack, and he has a lot of attack for a character. He has 6 attack and 5 health. As I zoom in, and you can kind of take a look at the cards in Ssteadfast's hand. So we know that Ssteadfast definitely has a lot of kind of the ability to handle Franz's board right now. And we just saw the second Maui come down to take out that Flynn Rider. And Ssteadfast needed to discard a card because he attacked into the Flynn Rider, and so he discarded the Rafiki, which now isn't going to be super relevant because Rafiki is really good on turn 3. Once you hit like turn 5 or higher, you got other answers. You got your Dragon Fires, you got your Be Prepareds. So I think the main question now is can Ssteadfast get into his card draw, because he is going to run out of gas pretty soon. And so he really needs to find those magic mirrors that he runs in his deck.
Yeah, I have to highlight something that we saw just a second ago. We saw a Maui come down, and then Franz responded by playing a Zeus, which has Rush, meaning he can challenge the turn that he's played, and Challenger +4, which just means when he's challenging, he gets an extra 4 strength. And I've been loving seeing this tech by Franz. We see so many people play Rafiki for things like this to get rid of characters because Rafiki's 1 less ink. He's a 3/3, so if he gets traded back into, he's still doing 3 damage. But Zeus is a great tech for cards like Maui, and obviously Ssteadfast isn't playing a card like Cusco, but another great tech into Cusco. Zeus does that 4 strength, which sometimes is just enough to get what you need to. But just like you mentioned, Ssteadfast is running really low on cards right now, and right now, Franz is doing great in cards. He basically has a full hand. I know that Franz is going to be counting the Be Prepareds coming out of Ssteadfast's hand. For those that don't know, both players have each other's deck lists now that they're in top 8, so each player should be aware of what each other player is running. To be honest, they each probably have it pulled up right now. And we're going to pull up the Cusco card real quick, because I think this is a very key card to Franz's deck. Franz is trying to go faster than Ssteadfast is. And Cusco is a card that has Ward, which means he cannot be chosen by an opponent's ability. So a card like Dragonfire that lets you choose a card and banish it can't choose Cusco. Any Maleficent Monstrous Dragon can't choose Cusco to banish it. The only cards available to Ssteadfast to take care of this Cusco is the Be Prepared. And Ssteadfast runs 4 of them, but he also knows that Franz is running 4 Cuscos. So if Franz can put out enough stuff onto the board, which we see he has a lot of stuff in his hand, and Ssteadfast stays at a low hand and is running out of answers, then he's going to be forced to play some of these Be Prepareds. And the moment that Ssteadfast runs out of Be Prepareds or gets low on Be Prepareds, I'm sure we'll see Franz putting down some of those Cuscos, trying to race his way up to 20, because that's going to be really difficult for Ssteadfast to work with.
Yup. And I was just about to say, we see the Ursula's Cauldron come down from Steadfast. That's gonna be a definitely a annoying card. Nothing Franz can do about it. Essentially, that Ursula's Cauldron lets Steadfast filter the top two cards of his deck and put one on the top and one on the bottom, just helping Steadfast get to the exact cards that he needs. And it's not, while it provides a different kind of value than Magic Mirror that lets you just draw one into your hand. The Cauldron really does a lot of good job work, especially early on when you don't have as much ink to play with. And so, as what we'll kind of continue to see is every single turn on Steadfast, he's going to use that Ursula's Cauldron, take a look at the top two cards of his deck, and then choose which one he wants to draw next, right? And so if any of our viewers are kind of wondering why kind of that is happening every single turn, essentially it just allows the control player to get better draws there. Um, the notable thing is neither player's deck runs any steel cards. It's a different color. And so because there's no item removal, we're definitely gonna see that the items that Steadfast plays are gonna stick around and just continue to provide more and more value as the game goes on.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. These values from these Ruby Amethyst players can be really scary because if he starts getting an Ursula's Cauldron down and he gets a Magic Mirror down, I mean, we already saw the combo last turn where he looked at the top two cards. They both ended up being a befuddle, so it wasn't anything crazy, but he knew which card was on top. And then afterwards, he played Maleficent Sorceress, so now he has a character on board. And then he draws the card that he knows is on top, so he can filter and he can get stuff into hand as quickly as possible. And as we can see, Steadfast is building up ink very quickly. He already has 8 ink into his inkwell. One more ink, and he'll have options for Maleficence and things like that. So the more items that we see come down, the more difficult it's going to be for Franz to do things. We see the White Rapids Pocket Watch come down, which is scary as well, because that
Yep.
basically means that Steadfast will be able to play a character and then immediately challenge with it most turns.
Hmm.
Um, but at the same time, honestly, there's a lot of countering going on that I'd like to highlight. So we talked about the shield earlier, about how great it is because it lets you ready your characters. And so that's great for Steadfast because he can attack into he can challenge into one of Franz's characters, banishing it, and then he can ready that character back up so that Franz can't respond. But then we see Franz play the Elsa, and I'm going to pull that up on stream as well. Elsa Snow Queen. If you exert Elsa Snow Queen, you can exert an opposing character. So now the characters that Steadfast readies back up, Franz can use Elsa to exert those characters and get rid of them if he wants to. And then we see another layer of counter through the White Rabbit's Pocket Watch, because now Steadfast is able to just play things and challenge with them immediately. So the Elsa becomes a little bit less useful because Steadfast can play something, and the turn he doesn't have to wait for its ink to dry to challenge. Franz won't have the ability to exert that Elsa and then get rid of it with a favorable trade with something like a Zeus or a Rafiki that can rush into it. So there's a lot of complexity going on in the game already, and it's really interesting. I really have to commend Franz for this deck because a lot of times when people hear the term aggro deck, it's really easy to think, oh, they just play stuff and they turn it sideways and they race you to 20. And sometimes that is what happens. But the way Franz's deck is structured is very strategic, because we see a couple things like the Genie on the Job that can target things and bounce them when needed. But not only that, two things that I love, we see one of them in hand, is we see a John Silver, and there's also a there's also a Mother Gothel. So John Silver will give a character Reckless when he's played, and every time he quests, he gives another character Reckless, which we see this come down now, which is going to prevent Steadfast from being able to quest. It's also going to force Steadfast to exert stuff and challenge with stuff that he doesn't want to, so potentially taking unfavorable trades. And then if Franz can build up enough of a board presence without getting Be Prepared, he can play a Mother Gothel, and when Mother Gothel quests, that keeps the other opponent from questing at all while Mother Gothel is exerted. So We're really seeing the pressure being put on, and the be prepared comes down, which is exactly
Yeah.
what I think Franz was trying to do. Flood the board, force the be prepared out of Steadfast, because we see two Cuscos in hand. He's intentionally not playing these Cuscos, trying to get those be prepareds out of there. That's one less be prepared that he has to worry about.
Yeah, definitely. It was also very interesting to note that Sethras did not play Be Prepared one turn earlier when he had a chance to. And the Franz had like three characters on the board, and one of the like interesting things, just kind of as a note to all of the viewers, is when you're playing kind of the control deck and the matchup. It's really interesting about when you choose to use your be prepared or when you choose to kind of use your characters to attack into your opponent, because in some sense how much lore your opponent has is actually kind of another resource, right? So for example, if you determine that an opponent isn't close to 20 yet, and you can essentially take a turn to build your board a little bit rather than have to play reactively, and just let your opponent get a little bit closer. So part of the skill in playing kind of control decks, or I guess Lorcana in general, is really understanding when you can kind of let up the gas a little, let your opponent quest, and kind of do some other things, and when that becomes too dangerous and you need to kind of answer your opponent. And so what we saw there was uh, Franz putting enough pressure on that previous turn that Steadfast needed to run out a be prepared. And then Franz essentially immediately played out the Cusco, because essentially you're kind of taking the fact that, okay, opponent played one be prepared, they're not likely to have another in their hand. So now the Cusco is pretty safe to at least quest once for three lore. And as we see, Franz only needs three more lore now. All of a sudden he's at 17 lore, and he does have another Cusco in hand. So I think how I would kind of I would definitely give the advantage to Franz so far. And I think the fact that Ssteadfast has not been able to get out additional card draw in the form of his magic mirrors or friends on the other sides has really just made it a bit difficult for him to be able to deal with all of the cards that Franz is just throwing out to quest.
Yeah, I really don't like the place that that Steadfast is in right now. Not only because he had an extra Cusco to play, so that means that Steadfast is essentially top decking right now. He has to see a be prepared this turn or he loses. But also the odds just aren't in his favor because he's already used to be prepared. So
Mhm.
Franz has more Cuscos than Steadfast has be prepareds, which means
Yeah.
in the very long game, Franz ends up winning the moment that he draws a be prepared. But I don't
Yeah.
see an answer,
No.
so I think this is
Yep.
just going to be game one. Franz is going to take game one, and
Yeah.
just like you said, with I think the major issue was Steadfast couldn't find that draw. You know, he found
Mm,
two be prepared, but
mm,
if Ruby Amethyst isn't able to get through their cards quickly and find those answers, especially for a deck like Franz is playing,
yep.
it's playing a lot of characters that have to be dealt with very quickly. You
Yep.
know, that just happens. Franz can go too fast.
Yeah, definitely kind of after you get to, so essentially I would say the stages of the game for a control player is control early board, right? In order to get to kind of your be prepareds and Elsa's and all of that sort of stuff. But once you deal with kind of hyper aggro early board and get to the 7 ink, it's not over yet, because by that time you're probably either running low on cards or have just a lot fewer resources to kind of play. And so you really need to kind of change up the game of, okay, how do I balance board wipes and kind of removal in the form of dragonfires, bee prepares, along with card draw from the magic mirror. Because ideally, you always want to be drawing more cards than your opponents in order to kind of really get that margin, kind of get some breathing room. And so really, like, even at turn 8 or 9, you're still kind of kind of catch up and struggle as a control player until you get to kind of those turn 10 and 11s where you can play a Be Prepared or an Elsa and draw a card. And that's when kind of the game starts snowballing in your favor. So really, the non-control player has quite a bit of time to try to kind of outmatch or put enough of a clock on the control player. Anyways, kind of going back to the game, once again we see no Flynn Riders from Franz this game. That might make a pretty big difference. As Ssteadfast gets out some card draw from Maleficent and Gaston's, and Gaston's are amazing to deal with kind of Cruella's or any the board that Franz has right now because Gaston is so cheap. He's only 2 cost. While he does not have rush, which means he can't attack the turn that he is played. Right now, we can definitely see Steadfast having a lot better draw than last game. He has the resources. The turn 4 is a little bit awkward because he doesn't have the Maui there. So I think it's either Steadfast is going to run out the Gaston or he's going to run out the Elsa. And honestly, I think both are kind of really solid plays and puts a lot of pressure on Franz, who has the Zeus, I guess, in his hand for the turn 4 play, or the Hans. And once again, that's kind of a toss up. What do you think, Brandon? What would you play if you were Franz in this case? The Zeus to take out the Maleficent, or the Hans for questing?
It's definitely a hard choice. Honestly, right now I'm trying to go as fast as possible, so I'm probably playing out of Hans, keeping in
Mhm.
mind that you're trying to get some of these Be Prepareds out of Steadfast, right? Like
Mm,
as the
yeah.
aggro player and knowing that Cusco's are a big win condition for you, if he has to use a Be Prepared in order to get rid of your board that doesn't have a Cusco on it, you're really happy about that.
Mm,
I was actually more scared of Steadfast playing the Gaston over
mhm,
the Elsa, mainly because in Amethyst and Ruby, there are a lot of cards that have an effect that happens when they enter play. And
mm,
so in the board state that we saw had a Gaston come out.
mhm,
For those of you that don't know, Cruella de Vil, when she's challenged and banished, the person whose Cruella that was, they get to
mhm,
choose a card to bounce back to hand.
mhm,
And so that would have been a really awkward place for Franz to be in with that Maleficent Sorcerer on board. Because as you were talking about earlier, early in the game, a control player isn't too worried about how much lore the opponent is questing, so long as they're not doing it at an extremely rapid rate. So Cruella only has 1 lore, and even with 2 on board, that's 2 lore a turn. You're really not too worried about that for a little while. You'll have a
yeah.
couple turns that you can catch up before you do anything. And if this Gaston runs into a Cruella and takes her out,
Mhm,
if the only thing to pick is a Maleficent Sorceress, that's not a great thing to pick. You can choose not to pick something, which is probably what would have happened.
mhm,
But at that point, you just kind of wasted Cruella's ability. So I like the Hans play that we saw from Franz. He's really trying to
yeah.
put on some pressure. We see the Mad Hatter come out,
I
which
I
adds up.
yeah.
It happens so quickly. There's 8 lore on Franz's side
Yeah.
of the board now.
I
So
was
he's like,
Yeah, I
"Go
was
ahead,
about to
Jay."
say I was about to say I was surprised that Sethras allowed the Hans to survive because that previous turn he had a chance to use Elsa to tap down the Hans and play out his Maui to run it into the Hans. But I guess he opted for a little bit more additional pressure. I think what he yeah, okay, so this is one of those cases where we see shift kind of coming into action. So Steadfast was able to shift Elsa onto the Elsa. So shift essentially lets you play a card for a little bit less expensive. Normally Elsa costs 8 in order to play because he has such a good ability. Since Steadfast had small Elsa existing on board, it only costs 6 in order to shift the Elsa on, which allows Steadfast to tap down 2 of Franz's characters, which he used to tap down the Mad Hatter probably and the Hans. Um, he took out the Mad Hatter, and the Franz will not be able to ready during Franz's next turn. And so it's just a really good tool to delay your opponent.
Yeah, and I love that play from Steadfast because I think essentially what he's doing is he's daring Franz to play more cards, right? Like you're tapping, or sorry, you're exerting something that can't be exerted the next turn. You're slowing him down. You're hoping Franz plays more cards, maybe even a Cusco if you're really lucky, because you're sitting on two of those Be Prepareds. You know you'll be able to play one of the Be Prepareds next turn. And then you can completely wipe Franz's board. Franz didn't have a ton of cards in hand at the time. We see he has four now. Oh yeah, and he's inking a card as well. So he has three cards in hand, which means he's gonna have very minimal things to play out after you play this Be Prepared and completely wipe their board, which I think is a great place for a
Well,
control player to be. You have a lot of answers in hand. You can start playing stuff out.
yeah, I would actually think that Ssteadfast feels no pressure to play out the Be Prepared right now. He has a way to play out, say, the Maui to take out the Hans. He has an Elsa on board. I wonder if he wants to use the Elsa to run into a Cruella, which is probably gonna bounce the Elsa back. But like it feels a little bit awkward to play Be Prepared, especially when you have your own Elsa that can quest for three, on the field. And so that's why we see kind of that Maui come down. I wonder so either Ssteadfast is gonna quest with the Elsa or he's gonna attack into Cruella. So he does, and Cruella does bounce Elsa back. So essentially, Franz is just saying, right now you only have 6 ink. Elsa takes 8 ink in order to play. So it's still like gonna cost you a lot more in order to replay that Elsa. One mechanic that I want to point out for our viewers is when you shift onto your card, both cards are in the same pile. So wherever kind of that pile goes, both of the cards goes there. So for example, Cruella bounces the Elsa Spirit of Winter back into kind of Steadfast's hand, but that also puts the smaller Elsa, 3-cost Elsa, back into his hand as well, which then Steadfast was able to ink. So that's just a mechanic that sometimes is a little bit confusing. So I wanted to point out to everyone viewing. Shifted cards or cards in that pile goes if it goes into a discard, both cards goes into a discard. If a card goes into your hand, both cards go into your hand there.
Yeah, and that's just going back to the thing we talked about earlier, where a lot of cards that Steadfast plays, you're kind of okay with coming back to your hand to play again. Like Elsa is a really big thing to drop. It stalls Franz out a lot. She has a great stats and 3 lures. She's questing for a lot. So I know that definitely feels bad for Franz, but you obviously don't want to leave the Elsa on board to challenge or quest with anything either.
Mm. Yeah, and now we definitely see this is a lot different of a story than before. Now we can see Steadfast has 7 ink, with a lot of gassing hand. He has 2 Be Prepareds ready, and Elsa at 8 ink, and 2 Maleficents at 9 ink. So I would say right now, I would give the advantage definitely to Steadfast, even though Franz is at 12 lore and Ssteadfast is only at 3. It just feels like he is better able to deal with anything that Franz can throw at him currently. And especially now, like that Ursula's Cauldron is probably really nice to see. I'm sure Ssteadfast probably wanted a magic mirror there, but the Ursula's Cauldron can get you to that magic mirror faster, right? So right now I wonder how or if Ssteadfast is gonna deal with the Flynn Rider.
Yeah, he we see him ink the Maui, which I was about to mention. He obviously can't challenge into Flynn right now because Flynn isn't exerted, but it looks like he's just going to play the Elsa and uh, exert the Flynn Rider, which is perfectly fine. That's just delaying Franz even more. For those of you that don't know, Flynn makes it so that when you challenge into him, the opponent has to discard a card. So Steadfast has a pretty okay right hand right now, but you're never happy about discarding a card from hand, right? You want to have as many resources as possible.
Definitely, and that's what makes Flynn Rider so good at such a early play. Flynn Rider, like a lot of times, just makes your opponent have to make really tough and awkward choices. Because your opponent can't really let Flynn keep on questing, but then they need to discard a card if they want to attack into him. So Flynn is definitely one of the staples of a good aggro deck.
And especially now that we see the Elsa Spirit of Winter on board, like you mentioned earlier, because of that reason, until we see something like a Cusco come down, I'm sure that Steadfast doesn't want to play that those Be Prepareds and get rid of the Spirit of Winter. So I'm very eager to see it. We see the Hans come down, which is probably a larger target than the Flynn Rider is. But is there ever a world where Steadfast has to play Maleficent and banish the Flynn Rider instead of attacking it?
I mean, yeah, that's definitely a possibility. The other thing to also note, and I think honestly, I think we might see the Maleficent banish the Hans because it can quest for more lore, and I think Sethras is might be just okay discarding a card to kill the Flynn Rider. The one thing I want to know is sometimes what makes Magic Mirror so good and scary here is that you can sing Be Prepared with either Maleficent Monsters Dragon or the Elsa, and by singing it, essentially you're freeing up 7 whole ink, and 4 of that can get you some additional card draw and so forth. And so I do think that like Be Prepared is going to come down sometime soon, but whether it comes down as a pay 7 in order to play it or be sung by a character could be really telling and interesting there. So we do see okay, so finally oh, okay, interesting. Steadfast does kill that Flynn, discarding his Ursula's Cauldron. But now you can see Steadfast rapidly gaining lore with that Elsa Spirit of Winter. It's questing for 3 a turn, and Franz's deck really doesn't do well kind of challenging into opponents, especially at 6 cost or Elsa that has 6 health. So I think this is one of those cases where we'll see if the John Silvers may be able to delay Steadfast, because John Silver can give the Elsa Reckless, which means that he can't quest her. But for the time being, we're gonna see the Zeus come down. It won't attack because Franz is still gonna try to quest out. He's only 5 lore away. Whereas Steadfast, after questing for what, 8, 9? Sorry, 3, 5, 7, could be at 16. But Steadfast does opt to take out the Yzma, and then has another Maleficent to take out the Zeus. I think, yeah, this game probably will go to Steadfast. There's just too much on board, and Franz doesn't have kind of the tools like a control player does to deal with a huge board state.
Yeah, and we can really see how drawing a bunch of cards as a control player really makes the difference. Steadfast sitting in a super great spot. He has 2 Be Prepareds in hand. So at most he can deal with 2 Cuscos, which would be the scariest thing that he could see come down. Yeah, and it looks like Franz is just
Yep.
gonna go next on that one. They're gonna go to game 3.
Yeah.
But it was like night and day between game 1 and game 2. So we see the power of drawing cards, and of Franz not getting those Cuscos, and of Steadfast being able to keep up and extend the game to those later games. And I mean, we saw it does not take very long for Steadfast to get stuff on board, like the Maleficent Monstrous Dragons and the
Mhm.
Elsas, that all are really big bodies, quest for a good amount of lore, and then in like 2 or 3 turns, he can just catch up to whatever the aggro player had gone to.
Definitely. Um, I think one of the biggest differences in that game right there was just Steadfast being able to get to the friends on the other side. So magic mirrors aren't the only way to draw cards in the Amethyst Ruby package, right? You have the Queen, which can draw you cards. You also have friends on the other side, and just the normal 3 cost Maleficent there. And so out of all of those ways to draw cards, I think that first game, Ssteadfast was just a little bit unlucky in not getting a lot of kind of his draw going. But that second game, I think he used probably two friends on the other sides, and that really made a big difference. So both players are running Amethyst, so I do think that a huge kind of part of the game is seeing who gets to draw more cards from kind of the friends on the other side, the Maleficents, and so forth. There.
Yeah, we've seen. I'd have to check again, but I know at least 3 of the top 4 decks in this tournament had Amethyst in it, and
Hmm.
that color is just extremely strong for the card draw, right?
Yep.
Like when you're drawing only 1 card a turn, and you're
Mhm.
having to put a card into your ink and then play a card, very quickly does your hand size come down. So Amethyst, there's draw in other inks, but Amethyst has the best cards that just say play this and draw a card. There's no
Mhm.
stipulation. It doesn't have to be a character. You don't have to choose a specific card. You're not having to filter cards. And for that reason, we're seeing right now is extremely strong, both in an aggro sense and in a control environment.
Mhm. The one thing also to know is while I can give enough praise for Gaston as a kind of tool for the Ruby player to kind of deal with aggro early game. I have to say though, a lot of times if an opponent is smart, they can bait out an attack from the Gaston because it does have reckless, which means that if Gaston can attack, he needs to attack. It's not like an option of you can hold him back for bigger threats or something like that. And so in that case, we saw Franz deliberately kind of exert Elsa and leave Elsa exerted as a target for Gaston just because Elsa can only quest for one, whereas his other characters like Zeus can quest for two, and you'd much rather the Gaston run into an Elsa than it run into a Zeus. There.
Yeah, and we see Franz is not wasting any time getting stuff on board. He's playing the Zeus. Didn't challenge with the Zeus because Zeus has 2 lore, and he plays the Cusco down, knowing that there's no way for Steadfast to play Be Prepared for at least 2 more turns, especially because we don't see anything like a Shift Aladdin coming down. Be Prepared can't be played until turn 7 unless there's a way to sing it earlier. So unless Steadfast has a way to get rid of this Cusco through challenging, this Cusco is just going to be getting 3 lore for the next 2 or 3 turns, which is
It's
a
gonna be
lot of
real
lore very
fast.
quickly.
Yeah, it's gonna be
Yeah.
real fast. But we do see that Steadfast does have to be prepared for next turn, so I think realistically what Ssteadfast is probably gonna do, I don't know if he's even gonna run out the Dragonfire this turn. Franz has 8 on board, which puts him to 15. So it's gonna be a choice, right? This is the tough decisions that Ssteadfast face. Do I let my opponent go up to 15 lore and then be prepared their entire board, or do I play out a Dragonfire and let my opponent go up to 12 lore? Um, and essentially, the cost of doing that is now you no longer have a Dragonfire in your hand for potentially the future when you might need it. Um, but at the same time, you're making your opponent be further away from their 20. Honestly, I think it could go either way. Maybe if he thinks that he has 2 Maleficent monstrous dragons, it might be enough single removal to justify playing out the Dragonfire. But no, Cephas wants to keep the Dragonfire in his hand, and he feels like giving his opponent a 3 more lore is going to be worth having that Dragonfire as an extra card in his hand there.
Yeah, and I kind of like this play after he drew the Aladdin Street Rat, just because like you're worried about them getting too close to 20, right? Because there comes a number in which there's stuff he can just play, and if you don't have an answer for it that turn or top deck it the next turn, which just means draw it next turn, then you lose. And so being able to play the Street Rat, reduce one lore, knowing that next turn you'll be able to play a Be Prepared, just makes Franz have to try a little bit harder to get there, to go for, instead of going to 15, going to 14. And sure enough, we immediately see something being inked and getting the Be Prepared off of the board. So now everything that Franz had built up is gone. He still has a decent ways to go. He has 6 lore that he has to get to. And we can see in Ssteadfast's hand, he has many, many, many cards that he can use to deal with everything. Basically, every card in his hand, except for the Aladdin Street Rat, is going to delay Franz from being able to do anything, because if we look at the Elsa Spirit of Winters, they can exert things, and so that they can't unexert the next turn, meaning they can't quest. We see 2 Maleficent Monstrous Dragons, which will just banish a character as soon as it comes onto the board. And if we see another Cusco, there's another Be Prepared in hand as well. So this might be the point in the game where Ssteadfast slowly starts to take control, and Franz just wasn't able to get out the gas fast enough.
Definitely. I wonder. Oh, so we see a Dragonfire there rather than playing out the Elsa. So interesting enough. And no ink from Ssteadfast. So it means that he's still a bit, at least 2 turns away from being able to play out the Maleficent Monstrous Dragon. But we see a Kuso come on board, which probably will draw out that second Be Prepared from Ssteadfast. And this is why it's always good to have a couple of Be Prepareds in your hand, just to deal with the Cuscos. Or not.
Yeah,
I'm
definitely.
actually surprised. Yeah, I guess
Oh,
I think Ssteadfast thinks that 16 his opponent being at 16 isn't going to be too much of an issue there. And I'm kind of inclined to agree with him. 16 is still pretty far away from 20, and now Ssteadfast gets that little bit more value out of the Be Prepared, taking out 2 characters instead of 1 there. So the interesting thing now is now Ssteadfast does not have any Be Prepareds, but because he has Elsa's, I think that's enough of a delay that it's gonna make it really difficult for Franz to quest out and get to that 20. It's so like some people may say annoying, but when you're playing against control, sometimes you can be all the way up to like 16, 17, 18, even 19 lore, and you just can't get out that last lore. And so that's probably something we're gonna see something similar to this in this game.
yeah, and like these are the decisions that make a control player go for be a sub 50% win rate and above 50% win rate with the decks. I love seeing these Aladdin Street Rats coming out, Ssteadfast analyzing that, exactly what you said, knowing there's not one single card that Franz can play that puts him in danger of winning the next turn. So he just draws out the genie, gets rid of another thing with Be Prepared, giving it that much more value. And now, yeah, we're just sitting pretty. Like you're just
Yeah.
the only thing you're worried about is another Cusco coming down, and
Yeah.
even then, you have an extra turn to get something. And
Right.
the more that Cusco doesn't come down, you get to play things like Elsa and
Yep.
Maleficent Monstrous Dragon to take things out. And so now we're seeing the part of the game where Ssteadfast, analyzing that 16 lore is a fine place for Franz to be at, he's starting to play his big characters out, and he's going to be able to start putting the pressure on Franz, saying like, if you don't find something to slow me down, I'm going to catch up really quickly.
Yeah, and I think kind of on the flip side of things, we're also definitely seeing Franz not getting his card draw cards, like Friends on the Other Side or something. And so I think of the like kind of most notable things, it's like hand size does matter so much. Like in each of the kind of games where we saw a player become like comfortable or like has the advantage, look at how many cards they have in their hand. Right now, Steadfast has 7 cards in his hand. Franz only has 2. So I think that kind of like does a lot of explaining why Steadfast is in such a better, more advantageous position than Franz currently.
Yeah, and like Franz could not be in a worse place as an aggro player, and Steadfast could not be in a better place as a control player. As a control player, you'd love having multiple options in your hand. You don't want to be forced to use any particular thing if you don't want to. And Franz wants to have a lot of stuff in his hand so that he can very smart in a really smart way play out the board so that you can force Steadfast to use certain things he may not want to. But only having 2-3 cards in your hand really limits your options. And you know that the way that Steadfast decks works with so much card removal, you can't just throw everything out on board. And a lot of stuff that you do throw out on board is probably going to get taken away anyway. So Franz is sitting in a really difficult spot until he can find more card draw or maybe another Cusco. But even then, that's not going to get him to 20 where he needs to be.
Definitely, especially given that Ssteadfast has another Elsa on the way. Honestly, that second Elsa may just do it. But not only that, but he also has another Maleficent Monstrous Dragon there. And Franz really, like, even if Franz were at 19 lore, I think he still wouldn't have enough to get to the 20. It's just kind of that tough situation of the control player being able to set up everything and have all of the cards that they need in their hand there.
Yeah, and I don't want to speak like this game is over just yet, but if Steadfast is to win, I really think it came down to that decision of playing the Street Rat over, I think it was a Be Prepared that he had in hand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it goes to show that like a lot of kind of these decisions have a lot of like impact. A couple of turns down the road, right? And so kind of making like a play on turn 3 or turn 4 can really impact how the game goes on like turn 6 or 7. And in this case, that was a little bit later. So like on turn 8 or something like that, Steadfast played the Aladdin Street Rat, choosing to save his Be Prepared and that sort of stuff, which essentially allowed him to kind of play the Be Prepared with additional value and have some other kind of cards in his hand in order to deal with what Franz may play. And so let's see what the board state is right now. Franz is at 17. Interesting. Okay. I don't know how Franz is at 17, but it seems like oh, go ahead.
He just quested with Cruella. That's how he got up to 17 from 16.
Got it. Was there a turn? Okay. So the Elsa like tap down effect already wore off. Interesting. I would have thought that Steadfast would have wanted to take out the Cruella before its effect wore off, but I think he ended up choosing to quest there. But I think actually Steadfast now is in a little bit of a pickle, right? I think he can take out the Cruella with the oh no, it'll be fine. He can take out the Cruella with anything and then bounce the Zeus back because yeah, Franz it just isn't doesn't have the the 3 that he needs. Once the Zeus is gone, Franz only has 2 lore on board, and Steadfast can quest with everything. So, man, that third Maleficent coming in actually pretty clutch there. If he didn't have the third Maleficent, I think Franz might have just won that one with both the Cruella and the Maleficent unexerted, and therefore not being able to be removed there.
Yeah, and something going back to talking about just how important decisions are early in the game and how they affect the long game. Aladdin Street Rat was played 2 times this game, meaning that Franz lost 2 lore, so he would have been up at 19. And which could have, were those not played, were the lore not taken away, Franz may have had just enough to place enough things and leave them ready for next turn to be able to squeeze his way by with a victory. It's one of the things that I love about this game is the nuance of just every decision that you make, either as an aggro or a control player. can make or break these games.
Definitely, definitely. Um, and so I just took a quick look at the chat, and somebody let me know, or somebody mentioned Franz is not running any one drops other than um what was it? The befuddled in his deck, right? And
Oh,
so that might be
right.
one interesting like I really enjoy Franz's like idea and deck here. I'm wondering if like adding some of that one plus Maleficent that can quest for two might be pretty interesting as a like kind of a tech in his deck because it might make his deck go just a little bit faster to outpace some of that some of the control decks there. However, I think that probably one of Franz's considerations for his deck was that the small Maleficent is uninkable, and Franz is probably running quite a few uninkable cards, and so he wants to kind of balance his deck, making sure that he has plenty of inkable cards there as well. But it definitely is interesting to note that Franz is not running any one cost characters that can help him quest there.
Yeah, so I just looked at the deck list, and Franz is running 14 uninkable cards right now in his
Mm,
deck. So
yep.
yeah, it definitely makes sense. Adding another four, Maleficent, I think it's biding her time, which is the one drop. Definitely makes it so it might be a little bit more difficult to get ink into the inkwell consistently. But
Yep.
with that being said, Steadfast takes game three, which means Steadfast is going to go on into the finals. This was a single elimination bracket, the top eight for the Lorcana HQ constructed tournament. So Steadfast will take on Walter Yensid probably tomorrow or the next day, if I had to guess. But we will try to get both Franz and Steadfast in here if we can and get a little bit of a post match
Hey,
interview.
Yep.
Franz is probably going to sleep. He's on East Coast.
Oh, is Franz going to bed?
That's what he said, but he might come if you ping him.
Yeah,
Okay, let's
I'll give
see
him a
if
quick
he's even
ping
here.
if you want to kind of talk with Steadfast.
Yeah, so first of all, congrats, Steadfast, on your win. You're going into the finals of the Lorcana HQ constructed tournament. How does that feel?
Feels pretty nice. I think that was like I don't how many games we played, like 7 or something. I think that was probably my 5th game where I lost the first match and then had to 2-0. So kind of and when you're playing that control deck, the matches are like an
Yeah,
hour
man,
long,
that
so.
that Ruby Amethyst control deck is everywhere right now. I forget how many of them ended up in the top eight and how many of them ended up in the tournament altogether, but it's a strong deck for reasons that we just saw, especially when you can actually draw your cards. That was one thing we mentioned in game one is you were having such a difficult time like getting into any of your card draw that Franz just threw out a bunch of stuff and you couldn't find your be prepared to take care of everything, and so he just kind of race you
Yeah.
down. But then those last two games, you were able to keep your hand size full and you just had answers for everything, man.
Yeah, the last 2 games I got pretty lucky. I saw like I don't know, 30, 35 cards, and then I saw like all the be prepareds and all the dragons. So, but I definitely think going in after the first game, I was like, okay, I have to mulligan correctly this time.
Yeah, yeah. And it definitely worked because I think in game two, weren't you sitting on two be prepareds for like quite some time?
Yeah, I was, and I was like trying to decide. Basically, what I had to do was decide how much lore. Like, I had to decide if I wanted to be prepared when he had 9 or like risk him going to 12. And I think I risked it, and then I ended up also getting John Silver with the be prepared or something like that. But
Yeah,
I
we
love
were
his
talking
deck.
about.
Love his deck. I was telling him that I was kind of a Zeus hater, but Zeus is really good against my deck specifically.
Yeah, we're seeing Zeus come out, man.
Yeah.
He's a great answer for a lot of stuff that we see in the meta right now. Like not only your deck when the Mauis come down and that kind of thing, or like taking out a monstrous dragon, or also when they've taken a trade, but also like against other Cusco decks, against other aggro decks. You know, you can just run Zeus straight into Cusco and it takes him out in one hit. So I definitely expect to see more Zeuses being played for that reason over Rafiki's right now. Um, But were there any cards that you tacked into this list? Did you take this list off of somewhere that you saw? I'm really interested in the build specifically, and if there was anything you were thinking about coming into this tournament.
Not really. It runs 64 cards. I mean, I built this deck probably a few weeks ago because we had to lock in our deck list, right? So
Yeah.
it has 64 cards mainly so I can